NBS happening now.
Well, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome back from Lunchtime Sport. And we know that for a much better dose of the lunchtime, of the sports news, you'll be going to the home of sports. That is Sanyuka Television, a sister station right here at Next Media Services. This particular afternoon, from this very hour up to 5, we will be having a discussion on one of the most affected sectors of the economy, if I would say so, and that's the education sector. There is a lot of anxiety, not only amongst the students, but also among, various stakeholders on what next for the education sector. We did see that because of COVID-19 in Kenya, they had to go ahead and call for a dead year. Do we want that? Is that going to be the same for Uganda? Maybe not. But as a result of the outbreak and the global spread of coronavirus, the government of Uganda actually issued and implemented measures that were aimed at controlling its spread. And among those included the total closure of education institutions. If you do remember, on 20th March, education institutions that total to about 73,000 with an estimated enrollment of 15 million learners were effected the government directive to abruptly close these institutions. But the directive of the closure indicated that the schools would resume after 1 month. Remember, that was around 20th April. And indeed, after 2 weeks, the Ministry of Education and Sports did issue alternative dates for reopening of the schools. But remember, this was not achieved due to the increased number of coronavirus cases and the patients, and this prompted an extension of a lockdown. But even in the last address of June 22nd, the president did indicate that education institutions would remain closed. And initially, the Ministry of Education and Sports had not made any sort of arrangements for continued learning of students and learners at home. While a number of traditional government-aided schools and then the high-end private schools did come up with arrangements for continued learning for their respective learners, that's leveraging on technology through websites, the WhatsApp, the Zoom, among other platforms on which they do continue to actually share learning materials. This is not the same for many others, especially for the low-cost private schools and those implementing the universal primary education as well as universal secondary education. Now, it is commendable that much later on, we did see the Ministry of Education and Sports issue a framework for the continued learning to facilitate learning during this very lockdown through radios and television sets. And I know that you've seen a lot of this on NBS television and many other media houses. But however, this sort of arrangement has also faced a lot of implementation challenges, which has left many children behind due to limited access to network coverage, ownership of these radios and television sets, but also at home, that the homes that own these tools, there are challenges of access to power, the cost of batteries for radio sets, the children with disabilities, especially the deaf and blind, special needs children, are not being catered for to ensure that they also receive continued learning materials in Braille format. That is not available. Now, recently also, the Ministry of Local Government issued a circular directing local governments to register learners in each and every village and teachers to facilitate and support home-based learning. But there are also quite a number of challenges facing the framework for continued learning, and there is need for the Ministry of Education and Sports to dialogue with the different stakeholders on the way forward. And that's the very reason why the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, ISA, and together with the Democratic Governance Facility, DGF, and the Regional Education Learning Initiative, really, have come together to ensure that we talk about these matters. And that's exactly going to be a discussion this very afternoon. You who is outside there can be able to participate on this platform or this discussion using the hashtag COVID-19 UG education. I will say that again, you will be able to use the hashtag COVID-19 UG educ. That will be able to, for you to send in your comments, to send in your questions as we do continue with this particular discussion. Now, on my panel, since we've talked about a lot from the Ministry of Education and Sports, I will be having the Principal Inspector at TVET, that is Mr. Joseph Kajumba, coming in from the Ministry, the Directorate of Education Standards at the Ministry of Education and Sports, right here on my immediate right. And I will also be having Ms. Safina Nakulima, who is the Program Manager, Rights to Education Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, which is our host this afternoon. And we will also be getting a discussion from Mr. Chirabo Silva, who is a Senior 6 student from Paul Mukasa Secondary School. How are they coping up with the lockdown and the fact that they are not going to school and they're not even sure when they will be able to get back to school? We'll also be at a later stage be expecting Ms. Grace Baguma, Director, National Curriculum Development Center, NCDC. But to kick off our discussion, we want to be hearing from Haji Mulindwa Ismail, who is the Director, Basic and Secondary Education from the Ministry of Education and Sports, on how the COVID situation, which has been longer than anticipated, what's the plan to secure the right to education? What exactly are we going to be seeing? And now that the ministry launched the framework for continued learning during this lockdown, how is its implementation? I mean, back in school, when you're in a class, when a teacher does say out something that you do not understand, you seek clarity. But this is TV and radio. It's basically like a program comes up and it is done. How all those are actually going to be put in place. Let's listen to his message.
I'm called Mulindwa Ismail, Acting Director, Basic and Secondary Education, Ministry of Education and Sports. I happen to be the chair of the COVID-19 task force of the ministry. First of all, I need to give you maybe a broader picture when it started, what as a ministry did to secure the right to education for our learners. Immediately it happened, we came up with a plan, a preparedness and response plan for the sector, and basically to make sure that our learners continue with education wherever they are. First of all, that plan, it was made even before we had a case. I think we moved faster than COVID itself to make sure that we prepare for our learners. And that plan had scenarios, different scenarios. What would happen before we get a case? And what would happen if a case is identified? And what happened, we all know. His Excellency the President had to close the schools, which was, I think, a timely decision and right decision at that time. So when it happened, again, going by our plan, because it had all these scenarios, we sat down and said, how do we reach to our learners wherever they are? Because they have a right to education, and we never wanted them to lose out. So we did quite a number of things. This plan had 3 major areas: continuity of education, resumption of school, because we know, even up to now, that at one point in time we shall have to reopen schools. So we had to plan when the schools would reopen, and when they reopen, what should happen. So all these were planned for. But to be precise and answer to your question, the right to education as a ministry, again guided by that plan, we had to think of a number of interventions. Quick ones though, because it happened in a very, I would say, in a half-hearted manner, because people have criticized and said, why move this way? But we didn't have that time to sit down and come up with a proper kind of, so we needed to appear to be providing for our learners wherever they went. Because we knew they were going to face a number of challenges. It came on short notes. Many of them didn't carry anything. So we moved very fast. We said, what can we do? We came up with interventions. One, we came up with a radio program and a TV program. Those were the immediate, so that they could keep these learners engaged. Because at the first point, we wanted to have them engaged first, even before we think of what they get, but to engage them so that their minds are focused. We never wanted them to be derailed, to be taken up by other things. And you know the forces are many. So we said, okay, let's engage them. So we engaged them on TV, on the radio. However, we knew these two are covering just a small percentage of our learners. 15 millions. What's the percentage? Less than 30% could access the two. So we said, let's come. We also used online. Those who had the internet were able to access some materials. But then we said, how about those vulnerable learners in villages? So we had to come up with the self-study materials. And these materials were targeting those vulnerable learners who could not access the radio and the TV. Yeah, there are quite a number of challenges, quite a number. First of all, the pandemic is unpredictable. At one point, we thought maybe after a month, we would be able to reopen schools. We are challenged. You remember a time when our Honorable Minister came out with some kind of a plan of how to reopen. And the public was very said, no, this is unrealistic. That said, we had another challenge again, funding. Like I've already said, we didn't have the resources then to provide for all our learners. So that's also a challenge. And many others. You know, our learners, the kind of challenge they are facing, is a challenge to us because the numbers we sent home, we are not sure whether they are coming back. Men are getting pregnant, men are married off at that tender age. Men are now going into other businesses. Ministry of Local Government is doing some kind of registration of the number of teachers in local areas and even the number of learners. This will help to now bring in the teachers to be able to make some kind of follow-ups, and also to receive some kind of maybe question. We are even putting up a toll-free line so that if a learner reads something and doesn't understand, should he be having an opportunity to call back, he should call back and say, how about this thing? I didn't understand here. You talked about living things. What do you mean? What are the characteristics? So that opportunity this time around is going to be given. It's not like in the first phase, I think it was justified. The speed at which we did this, in fact, you people be even appreciating ministry for the work they did in that short period of time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but of course we have a challenge that we are not moving to speed because of some change, but we have learned quite a number of lessons, and we hope this time around we are going to improve. Yeah, we have reviewed the framework, and now we have a new framework, revised framework, which we are going to use to distribute the current materials. So there are quite a number of lessons learned. Like, for example, radio lessons, we had issues. TV lessons, we had issues. Even self-study materials, like Rete pointed out, we sent materials, but it challenged even parents, because some parents could not even help their children. So with this new framework, we learned lessons and we are making some kind of improvement. So we hope this time around things are not going to be a little better. One of the lessons learned is that we need to have an education kind of radio, because there is a gap. For these pandemics, you can't predict, you can't know when it's going to happen. Today's COVID-19, tomorrow it can be maybe floods. What happens? We have learned lessons that we need, first of all, to have a policy on preparedness and response, some kind of response plan for any disaster, whether COVID-19, it could be any other disaster. So we need a policy. We need to know how it can be handled. Some other lessons learned. Other areas or other countries have already embraced, for example, ICT. Here we have quite a number of gaps. And that's why our parents are finding it a challenge, and even the ministry. Because if we had embraced ICT, online learning, and it was officially, it wouldn't be a very big problem. So we need now to work on that area also, to make sure that ICT online learning is part and parcel of our education system. So that's, I think, a very big lesson learned. There are quite a number of lessons were picked out of this pandemic. You can imagine some of our schools will say, no, we have Zoom classes. These are things we have never thought of. Some lessons learned rotating about our teachers. How do you manage our teaching force in such kind of situation? I'll give an example, teachers in private schools. We had never thought about this one. But the way they have suffered is terrible. They are not paid a single coin. And you sympathize for the whole system, because even those who are supposed to pay them don't have any income. So it's a catch-22. Teachers are not paid, schools are not earning, where the teachers are expecting to get what? Paid. So it's a catch-22. Now, after the post-COVID, we need to come out with some kind of an arrangement which could maybe address such kind of in the future. How would our teachers be supported in case such a thing happens? This is a very big lesson for us. You have had teachers crying left and right, unattended to. Note that the ministry doesn't want to support them. No, but even the ministry is constrained in terms of resources. The reports we got, some of the lessons may be learned, that some of these materials were sold. So this time around, we must make sure the materials are not what? Because they are for our learners. And my last comment I want to make, people have been arguing, say, should we prepare for a dead year? As a ministry, we are not planning for a dead year. That's the assurance I wanted to give. Our Honorable Minister put it very clearly. And she needs also to be appreciated, because many times she has come up with the statements to keep the public informed. She has issued the statements, and these have helped to bridge the gap so that people don't get to know what is happening at the ministry side. So we are not planning for dead year. We hope schools will reopen and our learners will be able to complete the year. We still have time. Still have some time. In fact, to some people, it seems as if we have lost a year. No. In fact, we are supposed now to be in the second term, in the middle of second term. So we have not lost the year, as people say, so we can still catch up.
Well, I think for all the learners that are watching this e-conference right about now, the first best information and news that you have received is that the Ministry of Education and Sports is not at all planning for a dead year. They are planning to ensure that learners continue being engaged, but also that the education calendar does continue. So for many who have been saying Kenya has called for a dead year, how about Uganda? Uganda Education Ministry is not planning for a dead year. I think that's great information coming through. Like I earlier on did introduce to you my panel right here in studio. I would like to start off with it, and particularly start off with Miss Grace Baguma, who is the Director, National Curriculum Development Center, or NCDC. And Miss Baguma, thank you so much for joining us and for coming through for this.
Thank you.
Well, talking about education and COVID-19 and the lockdown, very many people do not know when this will be able to end. The ministry came up with, of course, education materials, which is very, very much applaudable that this came through for learners, especially who couldn't get radios and TVs. But NCDC has come under spotlight, especially one for learners not getting materials. Some claim they did not receive materials at all. And then also on the aspects of lessons being conducted on radio and TV. We're used to a classroom setting whereby if I don't understand a thing, I can be able to seek clarity in that. Some of the parents have complained, you've given us material, we've never been to school. You expect us to be helping out our students when we don't necessarily understand what exactly is being taught, because this to many is an assumption that the learners are actually following. Some of them are not even watching. Sometimes electricity is off and all those other issues that come through. How are you assessing this whole implementation of the program and seeking to address some of these challenges?
Thank you very much. One, I think people need to learn and relearn. One of the things is that we must begin to think outside the box, all of us together. And we were faced with COVID-19, which was not experienced by anybody else in their lifetime, if I may say.
Yeah.
Where we had a total lockdown. But at the same time, the feeling was that certain things should continue taking place, and one of them was the learning. And this takes us back to thinking about what used to happen in the past with our parents and our great-great-parents, where learning would happen in the African traditional way. Yeah. You are not going to tell me that there is no learning. Learning takes place in any style and in any fashion. And the African way of learning has been hands-on. They teach you how to mingle the millet, you get the mingling stick, you do it. So, what is it that happened in this particular case? The ministry could not sit back and say, we wait. Something had to happen in terms of the radio, which, yes, that was the unusual approach which people are now battling with, fitting into the unusual situation that they were not used to. They were not used to learning on the radio. But we know that elsewhere in the world, radio and television teaching has been going on. We've been talking about e-learning and other things. But also remote learning, as they call it, is not a new thing in the world. It has been there. We've been hearing about homeschooling. And to me, this is an eye-opener for all of us as parents to know that we must be 100% involved in our children's learning.
Sure. Because
the whole issue has been take them to the school, take them to the headmaster, and the teachers will know what to do. And the parent is detached from saying that the child is learning. Is detached even to teaching the child the way we traditionally were being taught how to dig, how to mingle millet, how to peel matoke. All that the workers and the housemaids are doing it in the house. So it is showing us that go back, you parents, get involved. See whether your child is learning. And the issue of saying that the parents do not know anything, some of the communities where parents have been proactive, they have made an effort to ask siblings, for example, to take children through these home learning materials.
Okay.
In some situations, I have seen siblings who are in either higher classes helping those in the lower classes if the parent is extremely illiterate and does not know how to read or write. There has been an extra effort to see who can help this child understand what they are learning. So what we are saying, we are in this battle together, and we think that the parents should come on board and be proactive and find solutions together with the Ministry of Education in terms of if the ministry has done that little, what have you done to add on to the little? Okay. So that we can make the situation better together. So we need to make this situation better together. I know some communities where they made an effort to say, I was talking to one parent from her garden. I think she was selling vegetables and she would dig. She went to the Gombora headquarters and got the materials and photocopied for her children. And she was not understanding the things. She asked a neighbor's child who was in senior 2 to come and show her how they do the things, and she was able to take her children through. Currently, I'm participating in a research with Makerere University in Wakiso district to see what is happening with the home studying and what are they doing. So the Wakiso district, some of the areas, the DO's office was informing us that they have been able to follow up children in the homes, and the materials were taken positively, and indeed the comment you are making, some of the parents who don't understand have had an effort to see. And at the district level, they have made arrangements to get what they call zone leaders. The head teachers become zone leaders, they organize teachers, and the teachers go to the homes, home to home, to help. Since the classrooms are not going on normally, the teachers have decided that they can go home to home. They are on government payroll, those who work for government, and the district has organized them to try and give extra support and extra help to the children as they learn. Okay. But one other thing that comes and that has been paining me is that when we were preparing these materials, we prepared them according to the syllabus.
Okay.
Saying that by this time, they had done only 6 weeks, the children should have covered this. And we made the revision. To our shock and surprise and pain, many of the districts, children were not understanding, for example, material for P3. The P3 children could not do it. Meaning, what were the teachers teaching all this time? So is teaching going on even in the normal circumstances? Okay. If a child cannot attempt a P3 work and is in P3 and prefers to go for P1 work. So another revelation is that a lot is going on unearthed in terms of, we think children are learning, and indeed the reports of Uwezo and NAPE have been bringing out this information. Children are not learning. So we prepare the content, specific, basic as it could be, meant to fit in what the syllabus specified. Term 1, 6 weeks, as a revision. Remember, actually the material we prepared was revision. And we went ahead even to translate them into radio scripts. But that revision script became a problem.
So, Grace, one particular issue on that. So, was it just mere revision? Because many have been asking about the aspect of assessment. You've given me the work, then what? Because if it is homework, I can bring it back to the teacher.
Hold it there. That is where our people are going wrong. Please, colleagues, people, parents, Ugandans, let us not teach children for exams and assessment. We want children to get skills and to be empowered with the knowledge that we put in the curriculum. That is what has been paining us beyond. We don't teach for assessment, for God's sake. And what we gave them as revision was to go back to what we expected them to have learned that in those 6 weeks they were at school. And we said, here is some extra for you to revise to see whether you can recall what we did. Nothing in the front as examination. Examination is used as a yardstick to see whether you learned. But in our thinking and our talk and in our daily life, we seem to front it that we must say, are you going to be assessed, then you learn it. No, that's not the thinking.
All right, Grace, I'll be coming back to you in just a bit. I want to involve Mr. Joseph Kajumba here, who is coming in from the Directorate of Education Standards and the Principal Inspector TVET. Looking at the continued learning that has been going on, how do you assess the quality of these particular sorts of learning? And now that Grace has talked about the fact that this is more of a revision exercise.
I would assess quality really depending upon whether there is attainment. If the learner is able to attain in any material that has been provided to them, then we're able to know that quality issues are being addressed. In this particular context, it depends upon the background at which these children were found, or the learners were found. Learners were young or who are young, who depended entirely on the teachers for support, for knowledge, acquisition and provision, will find it much more difficult to attain compared to adult learners, for example, those in middle or upper primary schools and then the secondary schools, who can listen, conceptualize, who can listen, interpret. These ones are easier, they can attain in a much more, in a better way.
Okay.
But also, there are other reasons. There are people or learners who are in locations where accessing the media platform, various media platforms, is a challenge. There are those who are in rural areas who cannot listen to radio. There are those who are in locations where the network is very poor. Those who do not have televisions, who do not have radios at home, those have a serious challenge. So materials that are, the learning or the teaching that has been provided, or the programs that have been provided on radio and TV, they have a serious challenge. So they cannot attain when they have not been able to be on board. We also have parents or learners who are very well endowed in terms of socio-economic background, from affluent families. Those ones, they get on the internet, they can browse the various sites for additional learning. They are able to get on the media every day. They are not able to, they are able to know and they get to be on board on a daily basis. Those ones attain in a better way than the others.
Okay.
But also have a problem, a challenge. We do not know how the progression of learning in a much shorter way. We have given out learning materials like the director has indicated. They have gone to the learners. They are a revision, yes, but we will need to get a feedback. How have they looked at these materials? Good, it's revision, but did all the learners across the country, were they on board? Were they able to go through? Had they covered these topics? Even if they had covered them, had they understood the concepts? That type of feedback is very, very vital for us to know whether the learners are actually attaining. And this is one of the challenges we're already having within the sector. But I think as we shall get along, efforts are being made to be able to get this feedback through various studies so that we really know how the learners are attaining. If they are attaining, what progress have they made from the time when we had a lockdown to probably now?
Okay.
Have they gained anything or they have deteriorated? It's then that we shall be able to have a picture. But of course, since they are scattered, they are not organized, that creates an additional challenge.
We're talking about 15 million students, say, in more than 73,000 institutions. And you highlighted some from endowed learners, if we would call them so. But remember, when UNEB is setting exams, we do not have specifics for the endowed and those who are not endowed. And in such a case where students are not at school, where you would say it's upon the teacher to ensure that their syllabus is covered, because Grace already did mention that there are challenges of some of the students not understanding. Where do we get the balance up? Since the ministry is saying, no, it's not a dead year, that means if it is final exams, we all sit the same.
Well, this is a challenge. Like they did, the President's Excellency, the President indicated that we're in a war situation. You must squat, listen to where the enemy is coming from. So we are all caught, the sector, the learners especially, they were caught, it was abrupt that we have to stop here, and they all receded to their villages. Whereas if they're in school, they share. Children share information, they learn from each other, they learn from siblings, from friends, those from higher classes. For learners who are from environments or from homes where there are 2 or 3, or where the elder siblings may not even be abreast with the materials, where the parents are illiterate, those are very additional challenges. But when they are in school, they interact, the teachers support, other learners support. So that's what makes the difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I would like to also engage Ms. Safina Nakulima, who is the Program Manager, Rights to Education Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, which is our host this very afternoon. From the civil society perspective, where do you see the main challenges with this continued learning during the lockdown? And after all, we do not know. We may say post-lockdown because now businesses are starting to open up, but we do not know when the schools are going to reopen again, because the president has continuously talked about not having engagements of so many people.
Thank you very much, Mildred. From the civil society perspective and from the communities where we work, I would like to appreciate Mr. Kajumba for some of the problems or challenges that he has highlighted. That speaks a lot about the Directorate of Education Standards, but also the ministry, that their ears are on the ground. So some of the issues that we have come to understand through our monitoring of issues that are happening around continued learning one, and I beg to be corrected from Madam Grace, the materials, especially for lower primary, were sent in English. And these children, when they're in school, they study in their local languages. So that is one of the challenges that the community has informed us. So it becomes very hard now to tell this child who was studying a particular concept in, for example, Uganda, Runyankore, and now you have to tell them in a language they didn't study when they were at school. And then secondly, like Mr. Kajumba said, there is an issue with materials for children with disabilities, especially those who are deaf and dumb. Okay. Those ones needed Braille material, which as of yesterday, or from the knowledge we have from our community, because we have community advocates in different districts, that material is not there. That means that as other children are going forward with this study, self-study materials, the deaf and the blind are being left behind. And then also what is coming out from the community, because hearing from the Director of Basic and Secondary Education, he mentioned that they printed 25% of what they thought was needed for the learners. So there are so many people who do not have access to these self-study materials. And in areas where the self-study materials were distributed, they were distributed in few numbers. For example, one of our community advocates in Bale Sub-County, which is in Kayunga District, mentioned to us that in one class that has around 315 students, that particular class received 195. So it becomes hard for you to say who to give and who not to give. And in situations where some parents are able to photocopy, the materials are so wide, they don't fit in the normal photocopiers that are in particular districts. And there were also situations where the community has informed us that the LCs, the local councils of those particular areas, ask between 5,000 and 7,000 from a particular parent for them to be able to receive the materials. And Madam Grace was saying that we need to help one another. The parents need to come on board and everyone needs to come on board. But I'm looking at a situation where in many areas, especially in the rural areas, the levels of poverty are high. So a parent to get, for example, 7,000 for math, for child X, and then they have 5 kids, they have to get, different learning materials photocopied amidst the financial constraints that were caused by COVID, because some people had money, but because of the lockdown, because of the effects on the economy, even those who had money now cannot afford to do particular things. But also the other thing, when you look at, for example, radio and television programs, like Mr. Kajumba mentioned, there is no interaction with the teacher. So the students are saying that when I have not understood concept X, who do I ask? And I remember in the comments by Mr. Mulindwa, he was saying that maybe there is need for the children to call in. Maybe they provide like a toll-free number for them to be able to call in and say, I didn't understand that, this or that. But that is assuming that all children have access to phones, all children will have money on, or their parents have phones to be able to call. So there are some of these things as we work towards working together, the government, civil society, parents and children coming together. There are some of those things that we need to think about. Okay. Yes.
I will be coming back to you, Ms. Safina. I want to get back to Grace. An aspect of money. Actually, we've had this on media as well, profiled it, that parents are being asked for money, one, to be able to get the materials. But there is also the aspect of schools now that are saying, for us who can be able to provide e-learning, we want money. What do you have to say about that, the money aspect?
The money aspect becomes a bit unfortunate in terms of in the manner, because even these very materials where I think some people are selling them, we have been told. The materials were put on different platforms, such that if you did not get that large print from New Vision, you could download from a cafe and go and photocopy. And the cafes are all over, because your name registration is done online, and those internet cafes are all over the country. A proactive person would have gone to the cafe with 1,500, you download, you go and print, or you photocopy for your child.
Could it have been a problem of dissemination of information and people getting to know?
Some of that is that. But also, these were revision materials. So what is it? Were the children not taught? Because we said, instead of the children staying at home doing nothing, let us have a package that will keep them busy. So don't the children have their exercise books and the work that they had done at school and they can refer to it? So I think we need some proactivity on the part of our parents.
Okay, Grace, are you trying to say since it was revision, I could have as well decided not to get the material
because you had
and use the books of the students?
You can use the books which you did at school. You can listen to the radio. You can listen to the TV. They were different. It was a blended approach. They were different. In fact, to me now, I think even the people are getting saturated with too much of materials from all over the place. Okay. So the materials were like a nyongeza, an addition of what you have. And you also see a written thing and you compare with your notes which you did at school. Because it was not new content, it was content targeting what you had covered.
Okay. Mr. Kajumba, I want you to also weigh in on the aspect of money. Now, especially on schools, the high end that are saying, well, we can provide e-learning on Zoom, on WhatsApp or whatever, but you need to pay. We just, in the news, did see a school that was asking for over $1 million shillings for e-learning, because after all, I'm giving you information, I'm continuing to teach.
Well, I think as far as the government is concerned, it has not come out to insinuate in any way that to access these materials, anybody has to pay.
Okay.
But private institutions, depending on their institutional infrastructure and policies, they are coming out to say, okay, if we can give you this additional service, this is the cost.
Okay.
But as far as the government is concerned, this was laid on the table. Materials are being provided by the NCDC. They are available online. They are available in printed form. So any of those channels can be utilized to get to them.
Okay.
But as you know, in society, there are those who always want to do something extra. They maybe for their learners or maybe for them to receive. Those want to, they go in and probably try to. But also the institutions, I think, they are between a hard rock and a stone. They want to make things move. There are bills to pick, there are utilities, and one of the ways is to provide a service at a cost. Yeah, but the government has made the opportunities available whereby the learners can access free materials. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kajumba. And as we continue with this discussion, we of course do not want to believe and think that everyone is basically getting it on the point of view, because none of us here is a student in the primary or secondary education. We want to engage the students themselves away from the key policy players and the stakeholders. The students are very much important in this discussion, and that's why we want to bring in Mr. Chidabo Silva, who is a senior 6th student from Paul Mukasa Secondary Education, and secondary school, I beg your pardon. We would like to know from you, Silva, what has been your experience with this continued learning? What are the gains? What are the challenges? What do you think should have been done better? Silva?
First of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank Aiza for giving me this platform, like to speak out on behalf of the rest of the students around the country. E-learning is hard compared to the normal studies that we're used to. So, like, it's really expensive. Now, for example, me at home, we have one smartphone that I have to share, me and my mom. She uses it like for work stuff, her office stuff, yet I also have to use it for school. So it is really hectic. You cannot like force her to give you the phone or something. You have to be somehow lenient. And another thing, it is really expensive in a way, like you have to download stuff. Like in case they send in textbooks, they are really high and expensive. There is also some OTT you have to pay, so it is really expensive and it is hectic for real. And now, for example, at least we have a smartphone, but I spoke to some of my friends before I got here. I was like, people, how is this e-learning stuff affecting you? So, one of my friends told me, since he always like pays his school fees, so he was like, if this year is dead, that's the end of education. Or if they just increase something like 5 more months, that's the end of education. Because he has to pay for his school fees. Then he once told me that he gets a maximum salary of 6,000 shilling. And today I saw New Vision paper where they said like entrepreneurship. It has been my first time to see like a newspaper that publishes entrepreneurship. So it was costing 6,000 shilling, and the new he receives 6,000 shilling, and yet he has to pay a New Vision paper, which is 2,000 shilling. He has to pay the bank slip, like the previous term's fees, since they are demanding him. Then he has to continue with the next year. So it is really, really hectic. Some of my OGs have dropped out of school. I spoke to two of them last week. They were like, one is pregnant, another one is also like just got a miscarriage. So I was like, really? So, and I had Madame Grace, she was saying that they served out materials, but I have gotten an opportunity to be in two regions. Like immediately the lockdown started, I was in Masindi. There was nothing like material. I want to assure you of that. There was nothing like material. Then after they had released public transport, I came to Buyuko. I thought maybe the situation had changed or something like that. But when I got to Buyuko, it was actually somehow worse. It was worse. I went in like to check on my friends very like deep in the villages. It was worse. Many of my friends are out of, like, they really gave up. They gave up. They are just looking for jobs or something like that. Yeah.
Before I let you go, have you personally experienced or even talked to your fellow students about the teaching on radio and television and how that has come through? Do you get it very well? How do you assess this kind of, education? Because the ministry only wanted to keep you engaged as students so that you do not get idle and lose out.
For my friends, they really have to do some garden work. They have to do garden work or something. So they cannot access a radio. They cannot just gather like for lessons during morning time. They have to go work. That's a must at home, something like that. And some of my friends, I normally interact with them, and they are like, they are not comfortable with their parents. Some of them live with their step-parents, and a stepmom cannot, some of them, a stepmom cannot let you watch television in the morning as she's trying to watch her series, something, or a play or music, like she's trying to entertain herself. Then she gives you a platform for you to study. So some of them, it's really hard for them, like kind of like that. It's very hectic for them. And yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Chirabo Silva, who is a senior 6 student. But the good news is, Silva, the Ministry of Education is saying it's not a dead year. So I think, unless that is very good news for you to be coming through. A very touching story of what the experiences the students are going through this time. And I want to start off with Safina. In a nutshell, as we get to close off on this, what do you think ought to be done to better this continued education and learning? Because we do not know when this is going to up until when does it continue, and when do we open up the schools?
Like the president said in his last address to the nation, he said that schools are not about to be opened. And when the lockdown was put in place, one of the measures that the Ministry of Education worked on very fast is to have this framework on continued learning. I think what the government needs to do, and from what we've heard from the panelists on the table and what Mr. Mulindwa said, there is need to improve what we have. And that is the continued learning, where we've identified gaps, where we've identified challenges. There is need for ministry to come in and improve them. Like, for example, how do we ensure that we don't leave anyone behind?
Sure.
Children with disability, people people who do not have money, we've heard from Chirabo, you know, people who are poor, who cannot do what we expect them to do to access these materials. We need to try more. I know the government has tried all it can in the emergence that we got, but we need to do more. And to do this, we need to get different people on board. Ask the learners so far, like in a way of reviewing what has been there for the last 4 months. What do the learners think? How can we improve what is there to make it better until the schools reopen? Okay. But also importantly, there is need to add resources into this, because if they need to improve continued learning, there is need for government to put money into that to ensure that there is access for everyone, sure, regardless of who they are and where they come from.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Kajumba, what could be some of the lessons, the opportunities, and the challenges that have been faced that you highlighted already? But what are some of the opportunities you see in this and lessons that have been learned moving forward on the next implementation or the next phase?
Opportunities, thank you so much. Opportunities, the integration and use of the media and ICT. We cannot run out from it. It has come. It's challenging, it's difficult, it's expensive, but it alleviates, and it's one of the only ways, it's one of the ways we can be able to access the materials too. Parental involvement, this is an opportunity. You know, parents who are not heavily involved and they do not know, they did not delve deep into the learning of their children. But this time now, they've learned that maybe the science they learned 20, 30 years ago is different. And these are very, very new. And now they are picking interest, and this will be very useful. Lessons. We now have to embrace, although this is not very conventional, but preparedness for eventualities, what we would call plan B, is very, very critical. The education sector was very prepared. It had a plan before the COVID case was announced. Yes. This is very, very critical. And all the plans, all the interventions were realigned, were aligned in time before the case was. And this has helped us a lot. There's quite a lot which happened. But if we waited and scrambled to respond, by now probably it would not have been had with the first set of materials being produced. Okay. But behind the scenes, a lot of work was going on too. I think we've learned that the school is very, very important. Character formation, not only for learning, but even for character formation, for interaction. And there's a lot. Parents are now complaining. Children at home, they are eating food, they are playing. But the school is very, very important, and this is a very important lesson. Then 3, and the last one. I think it's important that the families also need a lot of empowerment in the various skills at all levels to be able to support learning. This time around, it was an abrupt, but it should not continue like this. The families, the parents, they need to know that actually it's important that they support. Like Chiraba has just said, they have to compete for a phone. This is a lesson learned. What happens if it happens tomorrow again? Should they compete for the same phone with the mother? So these are the lessons that have to be learned. Empowerment at this community level, at the home level. Okay. And then a lesson, the media is very, very, very key. In all forms, good enough with the technology innovations, things are changing, they're improving, they're becoming cheaper. I think this is where we need to be going. Thank you very much. Did you need to wind up on something, especially moving forward? Just one more. Just one of the challenges are really we need as a sector to look at the young and the vulnerable. We've heard of the learners who have got pregnant, the learners who are dropping out of school, the learners who may not continue, those who cannot understand because of the various languages. I think we now need to pay a lot of attention to those who consider outliers who may easily not get back to school, so that we involve them in the various programs as we get along. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph Kajumba. Before I bring in Madame Grace, who will be winding up on this, I want to engage once more Chirabo Silva, who is a student. Silva, what do you think, if there are any changes that should be brought about while you're learning still at home before the schools open up, what do you think needs to be done? How better should the Ministry of Education and the partners, National Curriculum Development Center and the others, do to ensure that you get the very best out of the learning that you are experiencing from home?
First of all, I would really request like they reduce the charges that they charge on data. or even like they can increase the time teachers spend on TV, because it's somehow very much limited. So they should somehow increase it so that the teacher explains more, because at times some teachers panic as they are teaching, they panic. Another thing, if possible, they can let us register in the schools around us, in the communities that we are within, so that like as candidates we register and everything is done. Or yeah, we do it in community halls or something. Or I ever had like that the Ministry of Education was given funds to cater for our education. They can somehow provide tents in each region, so that we can just go in where there is some good spacing. We do our exams and that will be fine. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Silva. I hear you out. You do not want a dead year at all. And I hear you as a senior 6 student or any other student who was expecting to be moving on to the next class being told about a dead year. So to wind up this particular panel, I want to bring in Ms. Grace Baguma on a few issues before you look at the experiences, the lessons that have been taken and moving forward. I'd like you to respond to about 2 issues. One was on the aspect of students with special needs who have not been paid attention to. Braille not being able, at least for the deaf and dumb. You would think the blind can probably, they also need Braille, but maybe they can be able to hear and get to know what the teacher is teaching. And also on the aspect of languages in which these materials have actually been said. We have thematic education. Many of the students probably at the lower level education have been learning through their languages, and they have to now be able to translate immediately to English.
Thank you very much. Let me start with the one of languages. There was a short time within which we are supposed to have finished and delivered these materials, because it was for revision. And the short scripts that we did for, actually for the P1 to P3, the thematic, the radio scripts were translated in the local languages. Okay. We did that. But the self-study materials, surely that's what I started with. Let us be in this together. What kind of parent cannot translate, or a sibling or whatever, the 2 pages or 3 pages that we had for P1 and up to P3 into the local language? Because that was a master script. And if you are proactive, so I think we need to work on the issues of attitude for our people. If you don't have a negative attitude, you are a mother, you went up to P7 or whatever, you can be able to translate that 1 page or 2 into your local language, and your child will be able to benefit. So those ones, the hard copy scripts were not translated, but the radio scripts, we translated them in a number of languages. Okay. And they went. But also, it gets back to saying, parent, please come into education of your child. Just like they used to roast the potato for us to go to school and water, and your mother will struggle to get that sweet potato. You can struggle to get something for your child translated into a language which you think your child will understand. Okay. So that is also attitude, and let us change our attitudes. Let us not think that the government has not given and you sit back. Okay. Be proactive. Braille, we first developed the hard copy materials, and then we brailled. We have the Braille materials. But
has it been disseminated?
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
These master copies that we developed, we did not have the money to reproduce them, to have them reach everybody. They are there in our offices, but we don't have the money. This is very expensive. Braille paper is very expensive, and but we have the work. We did it, but we didn't have the funds. So one of the things that I wanted to touch is to create a fund for education in emergency, like this particular one. The government didn't have money. I don't want to blame anybody. There was no money even in education. So we need a budget line that stands there for education in emergency, and which should have come into our rescue for some of these things that we needed to do. So that's what I can say on the 2 issues that you wanted me to comment.
Okay.
And they were not very complicated. P1 work is not a cap, and you can change it into a chikopo in your language or whatever. And any parent, for heaven's sake, would have done. Where I went in Wakiso, many of the times it is the mothers are the ones who have been doing it. Where are the fathers, Mr. Kajumba, to do the translation and to help? Yeah. This thing is too huge. You can't leave it alone to government only.
I agree.
We need to have the way, in fact, I'm going back to the way the 1940s, where a homestead would be involved. In the evening, the father is sitting around the fireplace to educate non-formally their children. Let's get back to that.
Okay. Any lessons that you would like to take?
Is, I think one of the lessons here is that we need to quickly see how to embrace ICTs in learning. It is there. So we wouldn't have had these challenges if we had. I know we have the poverty levels and whatever, but ICTs cut across even the basic mobile phone and whatever to change it into a radio. Then we need to accept that we need to have different modes of learning. That traditional thinking that learning takes place in a school and in front with the teacher in front of me should end. Let us look at different approaches of non-formal, informal. Because even when you are learning, one of the things we learn when we are learning education is what we call a hidden curriculum. And the hidden curriculum is when the children come to school, there is something they learn, but which is not programmed in the syllabus, but they learn it while they are in the dormitory. Unfortunately, many times it tends to what we call bad manners. Okay. Because your friend tells you, oh, me, then you learn it. And you learn that better. You don't write it in your books. You don't even write it on the blackboard.
Learned out of experience and
then,
action.
Oh, at night you are plaiting the hair like this and you twist it and you do it. So there is a lot of what we call hidden curricula. That by the time you finish even university, you are just too full with it.
Okay.
So let us also accept and appreciate that you can learn in different formats and ways. And it should not always be somebody's friend. And we are discouraging that what we call rote learning. The teacher-centered approach where the teacher stands in front and blah, 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 blah into you. We want children to learn how to learn. How do you learn how to find information on your own? Okay. We are looking at Shirabo, so that's one of the other lessons.
As
the other one,
time is against
we
us.
have to change attitudes. Yes. I have to insist on that, and also accept that there are different modes of learning. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grace Baguma. I've also been having Silva Chirabo, the student who was speaking to us about his experience, Mr. Joseph Kajumba here from the Directorate of Education Standards, and Ms. Safina Nakulima, who is coming in from our hosts this afternoon, the Right to Education Initiative for Social and Economic Rights there. I mean, talking about the Right to Education, the program manager through there. A number of issues that have come through. Parents need to be involved in the education of the children. It's not about the schools. You ought to be engaged in that. A clarion call to government on a fund for education in crisis or an emergency. We were caught unaware. This had never been experienced across the world. We were caught unaware, but I hope that we have learned something from that. Media, very, very important, that we need to be paying attention to it, but also pay attention to the young and vulnerable people. I mean, I think it was Mr. Kajumba who talked about involvement of parents or having to teach students at another stage. And also, Madam Grace did highlight about it. Sometimes education is not about the black and white that the students get, but also the morals imparted, and that does begin at home. Like they say, charity does begin at home. We'll be taking a very, very short break. This is going to continue the discussion. We're going to have another panel that is also going to expound more on the education sector in the COVID-19 times. But engage with us on using the hashtag COVID-19UGEduke. We'll be back in just a bit. All right, welcome back, and thank you so much for keeping it right here on NBS television as we do continue with this very important discussion on education that has been brought to us by the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. ISA, and also the Democratic Governance Facility, DGF, and the Regional Education Learning Initiative, RELI. And we do continue into our next panel that will also be expounding on a number of other issues. Now, in the first panel, one key outstanding issue that came through was on the aspect of children with special needs, or students with special needs that have not been paid attention to. And I'm glad to announce to you that in our next panel, that is one thing that we want to be paying attention to. But continue with the discussion online using the hashtag COVID-19 UG Educ. Or COVID-19 UG Educ is the hashtag, in case you have any comments, in case you have any questions to be running through. We are on all the NBS social media platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as online on YouTube, Next Media Services. Without wasting any more time, let's get directly into this particular engagement. Starting off from my extreme right is Miss Elliot Orizara, who is the Executive Director of Women and Girl Child Development Association. Remember, in our first panel, we hinted on girls who've gotten pregnant. Silva himself talked about some of his OGs who are already pregnant. Many education has stopped at the lockdown level. We will be expounding more on that. And next, I do have Dr. Pamela Nzeimana, who is a Senior Education Officer in the Department of Special Needs, that is at the Ministry of Education and Sports. We will also be engaging with her. I also do have on my immediate right, Mr. Martin Sebalu, who is a program officer, Uganda Society for Disabled Children. And also coming to us live from Studio 7 will be Miss Rosette Nanyanzi, who is the head gender unit at the Ministry of Education and Sports. I'll greet each one in your capacities. Martin, a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure hosting you. Dr. Pamela Nzeimana, thank you so much for making time through.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, and we also do have Miss Elliot. It's a pleasure having you right here.
I'm glad to be here.
And I actually want to start off with you, particularly on the aspect of the girl child. You've seen on media, we've compiled these stories even here on NBS television of so many students, so many girls out there who are pregnant out of this particular lockdown. How has the girl child's learning been affected by this COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you so much, Mildred, and thank you so much, our viewers. It's a shame that I will be talking about teenage pregnancy and mainly the girls in Uganda during COVID-19. We have had so many challenges as Uganda before COVID, where we have had a number of girls getting out of school under different circumstances, child marriage and teenage pregnancy. But for this time, during COVID, many girls have faced it, and not only in urban areas and not only in slum areas, but even in the remote areas, far, far away from Kanungu and Napak. And mainly there are 3-4 things that I think girls have been affected with during COVID. First of all, the issues of gender-based violence, of which mainly the girls in Uganda and mainly in slum areas and remote areas that have been affected by gender-based violence. Some of them have had time not to sleep in their beds because they have houses which are not habitable for 4 to 5 children with the husband and the wife, the mother and the father, where your father has to ask you to get out because maybe you are big, and then you have to go out and then find maybe not a boda guy this time since the lockdown is at 5, but again meeting this person who was also angry and hungry for you, and then meet you and rape you. The end result is getting pregnant. We have had challenges in the remote areas where we have to go back to the issues of the gender roles at home, and where our mothers, the majority of them, have not gone to school and have got these gender words that the girl is supposed to be cooking, and therefore you are from school and you are locked at home, therefore you have to dig, you have to cook. And some of these girls have not even gotten time to access books, to access the materials that the government maybe have sent.
Even on TV and radio, that digging is in the morning.
TV and radio, yeah. If you talk of radio, then you take me to a different story where maybe the girls, myself example, I don't think I had time of tuning a radio for my father
at that time. But again, even still during this COVID, where the income at the household was completely not there or low, but is there for just the basics. And then maybe you are using what we call the cells, the manda in the remote area, and where the girls did not have time to do that because
you
have to cook.
them when they're almost done.
Of course, yes. So the girls have been cooking. The girls have been taking care of the children. The girls have been taking care of the mothers at home, and therefore they have not had time even to access.
Yeah.
The girls have faced so many issues during the COVID, and I was looking at the three things: the accessibility, the affordability, and where you find that girls have gone into different activities. And one of them, if you have heard the stories, that some girls have really started even going in for sexual, for sex work, because at home there's no food, the food is not enough, they don't have the sanitary pads, they have not had time even to go out as they were doing to find a friend and say, give me some pads, and therefore some of the girls resorted to sex work. I was talking to doctor when we were seated in the room, and I was sharing of the house just here in Wakiso, where the houses are not finished, and these have turned to be lodges for the girls, and it's a shame when you find a girl of 13 years in a gang of 12 to 15 girls in a house which is not completed, and the boys are around, meaning that one girl is having sexual intercourse with another. And if you go back to the parents have not managed to keep them. We have had chances before where the schools have got matrons, and maybe the school has a gate and the girls have company around school where they have to share with their friends. But at this time during the lockdown, the girls are locked down, and if they get time to get other friends, and where we have mentioned about the issues of access to those important things that the girls want, like the sanitary pads, the book and the pen. This has really affected girls during this lockdown. Many things have happened apart from the gender-based violence, apart from the accessibility, but again, affordability of even reading from the phones of their fathers or their mothers. Okay. And if we take a simple statistics, I don't think in Uganda we have more than 50% of households that really own smartphones, where the girls or the children in the household would maybe use that phone to read through. And therefore it has been a very hard thing where we have a case in the scenario where girls have decided to say, we are moving out of the house to go and find a friend in another household where they have a smartphone, and I can be able to get work from there. But again, still affording to contribute to airtime has been a very big problem. Okay. And even, most of the shops have been closed, and even going to print has been a very big problem. And I'm not saying that boys have not faced the same problem, but the girls have faced this problem in a way that the boys have a chance of not being doing the gender role at home, maybe cooking, but they can be able to sit like the way we are seated and listen to someone on the radio. So this has again affected girls. I can just give an example in my house where I have girls, but again I find I'm sending girls, go and do this, go and do this. But the brother has a chance of watching the TV, and maybe someone is talking about education, someone is teaching, and just leaving that aside, that is in the urban area. But in the remote area, the girls have been affected compared to the boys. Okay. And in cases where I find that we have homes, I would just use a home in a park. Don't ask me if I've been there, but I've been in a park. Okay. And I've seen the manyatas. I have seen how the people live in Karamoja, and maybe you have a number of girls in the manyata. But remember, it is a time where everyone was like, the only thing I can do if the bar is not open, then I have to drink Kwete. So who is going to fetch water and who is going to fetch firewood in Karamoja? It is this girl maybe who was in P7 and she's hoping to do exams, and this girl has not had chances of even getting access to the book, getting access to the TV, and even getting access to the radio, and even having time. Enough time to know I have the books that I got from school, but I can be able to read them. And what has happened at the end is going to fetch water, getting firewood, and meet there this hungry man and hungry boy who is going to pregnant her.
Okay. Very, very unfortunate.
Add on the issue of early pregnancies, especially when it comes to girls with disabilities, girls with special needs, you find that the challenge they have is communication. More especially girls with hearing impairment. So when they reach home, they don't have anybody who can communicate with them, and then they decide to move around looking for people who can communicate with them. So that one has ended for them getting early pregnancies, which they have not planned for.
Because they're raped maybe on the way.
Yeah, they are raped on the way. An example, in the case, I had a meeting and people from Oyam were informing us that very many girls with hearing impairment have gotten pregnant. And it is because of this lack of communication, because of the way they communicate, sign language. These children feel more comfortable when they are at school.
Actually, now that you came through, Dr. Pamela, someone out there would love to know, has the Ministry of Education planned for students with special needs? I don't like to call it disabilities because it's not an inability. It's just that the children with special needs, we know that special needs schools on a normal school basis that come through. But COVID-19 didn't come with a special time for special needs children. How is Ministry of Education ensuring that this actually comes through?
Thank you very much. As you may be aware, the Ministry of Education came up with a framework to ensure all learners continue learning. So they did not isolate or say this will not cater for children with special needs. So in the framework, issues of children with special needs have been captured. And then when you look at the guidelines that the Ministry of Education has developed, it well indicates how children with special needs should be catered for. But when you talk of children with special needs, it is something that has different varying needs.
Exactly. Dr. Pamela, talking about it is different. The implementation is also different because Dr. Grace, in the Miss Grace Baguma in the previous panel said, for example, Braille, they printed the master copies but could not be able to duplicate because it's expensive. They didn't have the money.
Yeah, as the director of NCDC mentioned, the Ministry of Education, working together with the NCDC, we have adapted the materials into Braille, but we have the master copy. And the master copy, it needs funds to print all copies to distribute to all learners with special needs, more especially those with visual impairment. At the same time, the Ministry of Education, together with NCDC, have adapted. You know, that's why I was saying, special needs have varying needs. As others, their materials get ready now. For them, there is that issue of going to adapt, because you can't simply take them the way they are. So that issue of adapting the material, it's also a process. So the Ministry of Education did not leave it out, but it took it on board so that these materials can be adapted and waiting to be printed and be distributed to children with special needs. Then some other categories, as I said, different needs, like a learner with physical impairment. Like somebody who is in a wheelchair, somebody who is walking in crutches, he can be able to use the self-study materials that NCDC developed and the Ministry of Education have distributed to children. So different varying needs of learners with special needs can be catered for in different ways.
Okay, Dr. Pamela, can you just, for our viewers, break down the various, special needs categories that we do have and that the Ministry of Education actually pays attention to?
Thank you very much. All the categories that we have those with the physical impairment. The physical impairment, they have mobility challenges. And then we have those with visual impairment. Those with visual impairment, if there is a radio talking, they can listen and understand. But when it comes to printed materials, they need specialized materials which we have to adapt and transform into Braille.
Okay.
Then we have those with hearing impairment. Those with hearing impairment on television, if there is no interpreter, sign language interpreter, they cannot understand. But the NCDC material, which we have adapted into sign language, it has catered for sign language interpretation to enable learners with hearing impairment to understand. We have children with autism. Children with autism, these are children.
The evidence, they would be able to bring our teachers to interact with these learners, and if they can use the so-called grants that already exist, for example, the capitation grant and other grants for special needs teachers.
Which are not working anyway.
Which are not working now, yes. And then they support these teachers to call and follow up with these learners. Even what I'm saying is, I'm just saying it for learners with disability, but it can also cater for other learners, okay? Though I know the numbers are many, they are talking about 15 million, and children with special needs are approximately 2.5, according to UNICEF. So, if this was done, it would be supportive. But you find that other challenges with learners with special needs. First of all, the attitude at home. Some of them are left at home just to watch over, because now in this era, people are struggling to get food, you know, and they see this one as a burden at home, okay? Then you find that most of these learners, their materials, you're only talking about distributing, but a special needs child may not only use, access these materials and learn. He needs, for example, that one who is visually impaired needs a Braille machine, which is approximately 1.5 million, okay? That is one learner. Then you find that these our brothers who are, and sisters who are who are deaf, you find that they need some materials in video format whereby someone is signing, okay? But you find that some teachers, or some of these videos that we are talking about, like those running on TVs, it's not all about signing. It's about how you are expressing yourself in that video, okay? It's even better to have a sign language teacher taking lead than having two videos, because they will complain the other small video is very small, they can't really interpret. Even this mainstream teacher is not using much of the gestures, right, or body language on what he's talking about, okay? So those learners lose out. So how can you support them? Because even when you look at the existing inclusive schools and special needs schools, they do have an annex, whereby a special annex where those learners out of the mainstream classroom, they are taken out and given that extra support to catch up with the rest. Okay. Yeah. So that is those are the challenges in this period, and you find that issues at home with their parents, with their environment. These learners learn best with their peers. Okay. So in this COVID era, you find that some of them are just scattered. You can't trace them, you know, because they need to share, they need to interact. As in this way, it boosts their morale, okay, to continue with the learning process. Then you also find that these learners, the evidence that we have, I don't know, I have to throw the blame to the government ministries, the line ministries. As we speak now, Minister of Education is someone talking about education, but you find that in this era, we also need the ICT ministry to come on board, okay, to support. Because you find that some of these issues are not well known. Even recently, in 2018, was it UCC? They carried out a research, a countrywide research, which I participated in. Okay. They were trying to find out persons with disabilities who are able to access and use ICT materials. I mean, gadgets like a phone, a smartphone, a TV. Computer. But now they have that data. But our ministry also has, I don't know if they have interacted with them to compare notes and, you know, come on board so that they do the right thing because you find that they will always tell you that they are scattered, but the evidence would be there and it is scattered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. I'm going to definitely be coming back to you. That was a great submission, that you're talking about challenges, but then also being able to provide what should be done in that respect. I now want to get joined by Ms. Rosette Nanyazi, who is the head gender unit at the Ministry of Education and Sports. Rosette, if you can hear me, would like to know whether the Ministry of Education and Sports implementing these interventions to ensure that girls are actually not left behind. You've already heard about some of the challenges that girls are facing, looking at gender roles, looking at many of them now that have been impregnated, and that could actually be the end of their education. Is Ministry of Education particularly paying attention to girls' education?
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the listeners for tuning in. First of all, I want to appreciate that government is already doing a lot of work to ensure that girls and women are protected during this period. So what we are doing as Ministry of Education is we have developed messages that accompany our reading materials to ensure that we ensure safety and security of our girls during this period. We appreciate that when these schools were locked up, almost 52% of the children that were affected were adolescent girls. And these have experienced a lot of challenges, like Harriet has already shared, issues around access to the basic requirements, like sanitary pads, issues around GBV, issues around being able to, their gender roles, being able to have time to read because of their gender roles. And we realize that that, in a way, has affected them, and it could contribute for them not coming back to school. So what the Ministry of Education is doing is we have developed messages that accompany our reading materials on positive parenting, on ensuring that children access the basic requirements, but also ensuring that the children are protected during this period. We are also working with the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development under the multi-sectoral approach. We realize that the challenges Harriet has already alluded to cannot be addressed by Ministry of Education alone. So we are working with other partners. We are working with the police. We are working with the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. We are working with the Ministry of Health to make sure that we send out messages, but also emphasize our reporting, tracking, and response guidelines on cases of violence against children with a focus of protecting the adolescent girls. However, as we are doing that, the role of the parent needs to come in handy. As ministries, we can be able to do our work, but what is the parent out there doing as far as protecting this child, as far as protecting them from getting pregnant, as far as ensuring that they have time to read, as far as giving them psychosocial support? The parent has to come in handy. And here I want to say that, yes, we have a challenge, but time has come for our parents to play their roles, because right now as Ministry of Education, we are not in the communities out there. It is the parent. We expect our parent to be the teacher. We expect our parent to give psychosocial support, guidance and counseling to this child, but also provide the basic requirements and ensuring that the home environment is conducive for this girl to continue with her education. So we are doing a lot of that through media engagements. We make sure that we engage the media. We cannot reach out to all the parents, but we want the parents to get the information. So we are using the media as the best channel to reach out to so many parents out there, to make sure that this message reaches out to all the parents out there.
All right, Rosette, I love the fact that you're using media and also continuously calling upon parents to be engaged. But Elliot talked about gender-based violence, which is very much happening, and we've seen the cases, the reports from police that have hit by more than 5 times in just the space of the lockdown. In the case that a girl is in a GBV home for the parent, how do you expect them to be engaged? All right, I will be getting back to Rosette in just a bit. But maybe Elliot, yes, you wanted to get in.
Yeah, I wanted to get in. I like all the concerns that the ministry is bringing out in terms of the gender responsiveness during COVID. But my biggest problem where Rosette is calling in the parents to take care of the children, being the second lens to the pupils at home. I think where she's saying that we need a psychosocial support. During this COVID, I think most of the households where we have had challenges, not in that middle class or in the high class, but when you go to the remote areas or in those families where there is no enough income, where the bread earner was this husband that was working in an arcade, and the arcade is closed, and then the mother was a home-based worker. I think at this time we may need to look at 2 things. Yes, Rosette is bringing in the issue of marriage sector by the Minister of Gender, but I think the parents also need psychosocial support. So in this case, we have a challenge. Excuse me. We have a challenge in a way. The child needs a psychosocial support, the parent needs a psychosocial support, and the teacher within the community has more problems maybe than the child, because the teacher also has children. And where the children have been staying in school, maybe having food at home. And in this case, I don't know how the ministry, the line ministry, has really planned. And going forward, on the issue that Rosette is bringing out, how has the education sector prioritized the issue of the safety of the girl at home? In this case, where there is no support. The parents are running out, and like there is no food at home. The girl, maybe the child is asking for food, the food is not there, and maybe the husband is like, excuse me, you have been saving some little money, please bring that money. And as doctor said, we're all not organized. We didn't know that this pandemic is coming in. So what is the government trying to put in place? For example, Rosette said, yes, they are bringing out the messages, but which messages? If you are talking about the inequalities, are the messages translated in different languages? Oh. And if this mother or the father at home is already stressed, I don't seem to think that the messages are going to work now. The messages are going to work if the ministry brings out the teachers who are already in the community, because from different scenarios, most of the teachers who were in the urban areas or who were in the schools, in boarding schools, are now in the community. We would want to see civil society working with the ministry, working with the community, bringing out these issues together, coming together. Maybe the message has come, okay, don't violate this child. Don't make this child be at home as a child laborer, you know. But again, even me as the mother, even me as the child, I mean as the father, I am confused, you know. For in this case, I would want to, going forward, to think that the Ministry of Gender, Ministry of Education, would work out as a model of working with ISA and other organizations that are working within the community. And maybe even the church leaders. I know this is not the time to talk about this, but I think, as Rosette talked about the issue of psychosocial support, at this time, we may find that, Mildred, you need it. Yeah. I don't know.
Everyone does. At this point in time, it's stuck.
Yeah, so I think it is very important. Yeah. And maybe what Rosette was bringing out, the issue of gender responsiveness in the community. Who is there to do that? Yeah. We need the psychosocial support. We know that children with special needs, I know doctor talked about all those things. But doctor, again, did not bring out the issues of children with dyslexia. of which mostly the ministry comes in to talk about all these types of special needs of children. But again, I have a mother in the community who does not understand what has been happening with this child who has a dyslexic. And then you want me to you have brought me these papers, of which I may not even understand everything, but even the child I'm teaching. And I think that's what Martin was bringing in, that is it possible to have a one-to-one? Has the ministry tried to have a methodology of knowing that we have a certain number of teachers in the community, and maybe the church is closed, we can't teach from the church, we can't be in the school, and now, how do I manage to know that in this community there is a teacher who was in Nakapriprit, but this teacher was trained in special needs, so this teacher can help around how many? 5. But do we have the statistics of the number of children having a certain type of disability?
Like Martin was actually asking. Thank you very much, Elliot. But also there is the aspect of social distancing and being very, you know, sure of who the person is. I don't know where the teacher has been. They could be spreading COVID-19, but very sure to pay attention to that. I want to get back to Rosette. Rosette, some particular issues that have come through. You talked about parents being engaged, and this is an assumption. And by the time the president said, let all the students go back home, it was an assumption that a home is one of the safest places for the students. But we've seen out of statistics and reports by the police that some of these homes have turned out to be violent. For example, you have a girl child or students, girl children, who are in the home that is filled with gender-based violence between their parents. How then do you expect, one, the parent, you know, engagement in the day-to-day learning of the students? But also, Elliot did bring out the aspect of translating the messages that you talked about in various languages for them to be easily understood, but also bringing on board teachers within the communities to help with the one-to-one learning that would be needed.
Thank you very much. First of all, we need to appreciate that as government we have a number of structures that we work with in the communities. At the village level, we have people who are responsible for children's issues. At the sub-county level, we have people who are responsible for children's issues. So what we have been doing is Ministry of Education has been working closely with those local structures, again putting into consideration issues of social distancing. We don't want to have a teacher coming from their home, we don't know who slept in their home, to go again into another person's home to do what? To teach. But when the chairman, LOC1, can use other avenues to make sure that this child is safe, this child is learning. Indeed, when it came to distribution of the resources that we are using for our children to learn, the LC chairperson has been key. That is a person at that local level who has been helping us to do this work. On the issue of, Elliot raised the issues around psychosocial support for everyone. What we are doing as Ministry of Education, we are setting up an helpline specifically for our teachers to make sure that those teachers that are challenged can reach out to the ministry and get guidance and counseling. For the rest of the children, we have our child helpline, which is 116, the Sauti. That line is used to report all cases of violence happening to our children in our community. It is a free line that can be used by any stakeholder who is involved in issues of child protection. However, as we are doing that, we also appreciate that we have some challenges within our communities. And for us, we are very much interested in seeing that all cases of child abuse are reported, tracked, responded to, and referral services provided to make sure that the children access all these services, not just leaving them to suffer alone in their homes. So that is what we are doing. It is a bit challenging, but we need to go with what is available as we learn lessons.
Thank you very much. Rosette, we'll be coming back to you in just a bit. Dr. Pamela, we have continuously talked about parent engagement. But in this case, let's zero it down to children with special needs. Number one, Elliot did talk about the aspect of dyslexic children, or I don't know whether the ministry has actually paid attention to those. But also, you're asking parents to get involved. I took my child to a special needs school because I personally cannot be able to attend to that. For example, I don't know how to read Braille. How then do you expect me to help my student with some, even if these materials were actually to be printed?
Thank you very much. As Elliot said, I did not mention all the categories, but
Okay.
we have over 21 conditions that have been identified to be found in our schools.
Okay.
So if I'm to mention them, it may take
You mentioned
much
just a
time.
few.
So we have those with visual impairment, with dyslexia, those with spinal bifida and hydrocephalus. We have those with intellectual impairment, hearing impairment. We have those with the behavioral disorders. So there are different
So many.
categories.
I think
There are
that's
so
for the
many.
benefit of our
Yes.
viewers as well.
So as I said, every category has a different need. Some of the needs can be catered for using the ordinary provisions. So with those ones, those with the physical impairment, I have my eyes, my ears, my mouth. I can sit like any other child and read the materials, watch the TV, and listen to the radio. Then we have those others who need special care. They need specialized skills. But as a challenge, very big challenge in the area of special needs, as you have mentioned, children with special needs, parents send them to special schools because they cannot manage to support them. Children with dyslexia, a parent may not understand that child, but the teacher will understand. A child with autism, the parent, one case was reported that one child with autism refused to eat for the whole month because he wanted to go to school. So we have all those challenges in the area of special needs. And as I said, this COVID came when we were not prepared. If we were prepared and know that these cases come and we have all these challenges, parents would have been trained. So we need training of parents on how to manage their children, especially children with different special needs. And then another thing is that we are not only talking of those with dyslexia. I had mentioned children with hearing impairment. Their communication is through sign language. Without sign language, a child with hearing impairment will not understand. And most family members do not understand sign language. So the child feels comfortable when he is at school. So, and some of our adolescents, that's why they decided to move around, because they are looking who can communicate with me. And they end up getting raped and they get pregnant. So in the area of special needs, the ministry is not seated. But the challenge we have is that there are very many with different varying needs. And we need strong partnership so that we can be able to support these learners. Another thing I said, partners, working with partners. The Ministry of Education is working with the partners, working in the area of special needs and inclusive education. And we have been holding meetings. Many of our partners, like you find a partner so-and-so is working in a Guru district. So when you go to Guru, that partner has at least, even they have printed materials, they have supported the children with the special needs in that area. You find another partner is working in Karamoja. So that's how we have been coordinating with our partners to ensure that these learners with the special needs are not left out.
Okay, and maybe finalizing on this particular one, what are the lessons apart from having to work with partners? You've talked about that, the need for training parents to work with special needs children. What other opportunities does the Ministry of Education see in these? The challenge that we've got, we were caught unaware, but also the lessons learned moving forward, because as yet we don't know when the schools will be open.
Another opportunity is the use of ICT. As if a child has a tablet, even if he's a child with dyslexia, he can listen. And when he's listening, he will understand. Leave alone where he may not understand the written material, but they can listen.
But you know, Dr. Pamela, sorry for interrupting you. When we talk about this, it continues to give an assumption that we are only looking at theoretical subjects. There are practical subjects like sciences that you don't need to listen, you literally need to do it yourself.
I was still coming to that one.
Okay.
I was still coming to that one.
Go
Like
ahead,
we
go
have
ahead.
children with the intellectual impairment who may not do academic. We teach them skills.
Okay.
So they do self-help skills, activities for daily living. So that's why I said a parent is a key in the area of special needs. Okay. Once a child has come from school, he has been being taught how to greet, how to set activities for daily living. Okay. And the parent is able to continue from where the teacher has ended. So it helps the children to continue learning. Most of the children's special needs do activities for like entrepreneurship. They do tailoring, they do knitting, they do all those activities, they do farming. So that's why I'm saying once they are at home and the parents have the knowledge and also changing the attitude, because some parents may say, this one I cannot manage. Then even in the community also, this one, you just leave. Education has ended. And we are worried that some of these children especially may not come back to school. Okay. So mobilization, sensitization, awareness raising is still needed, and it should continue to ensure that children with special needs are supported. They come back to school, even they can be able to study while at home. All
right, Martin, I want to end off with you. What are some of the opportunities that you see? You did highlight some of the aspects that Ministry of Education could be able to pick up from.
Yeah, sure. Now, for the first one, we have had an opportunity to understand that these learners exist.
Yes.
And one of the two things I would say, my doctor is talking about a tablet, but me, I will stick to one thing that we should work within our means. Because I've traveled in different parts of the country, I don't know if the learners I found in a place called Yachi down there in the Rhino camp in Arua can access that tablet. I don't know if even the head teacher can really use it, you know, even training. So what I'm saying, the opportunities we have for starters, one.
With the tablet, what I was meaning.
An example.
It was an example, and I'm saying, if we were a country, like in a country in Israel, all children with special needs, government gives them tablets. And in this time of COVID, these children have been learning, interacting with their teachers, watching television, watching things, and they are able to learn.
So I will take that as an example. Okay, no problem. Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I've seen, I've been watching on media education programs. One thing I've seen that has to be adopted, most especially by NCDC in our curriculum, that we should adopt some videos for some illustrations. For example, someone is talking about terraces as a means of, as a method of controlling erosion in Kabale, but I'm in Soroti. So I'm thinking that should be adopted in the classroom, in the learning process. For example, if our schools, I'm looking at the inclusive perspective. If we have maybe rechargeable projectors and the teacher maybe is talking about a certain topic and is able to display, you know, if it is a dam, some of these pictures, so that our learners don't learn in a passive way. They just talk about a dam, they have never seen it. They just talk about something, you know, that is one opportunity we have seen. Okay. Secondly, we have seen that it's very key to support our parents, you know. The ministry should not look at education for only learners, but even the parents should be on board. For example, for learners with special needs, the parents need to know about activities for daily living, so they don't see these learners as a burden. Okay, activities for daily living. I mean, a child is able to clean, to wash, to lay his or her bed. Okay, to support a parent at home. You know. What I'm talking about is minimal dependence, even in learning, okay? How can he use the available opportunities to really access these? Because you'll find some parents are looking at these children as a burden, okay? And they're not empowered to really claim for what they need, for their needs. Just because they are what? The parent doesn't know what to do, and even the learner is what? Stranded, okay? Then the other opportunity that we are looking at is it's high time the ministry gets on board with other key stakeholders. so that we see that the inclusive education policy, I know Doctor is in the know of this, that is passed. This policy is aiming at seeing our schools as a service center at the end of it all. We have schools where our system already is excluding many learners. You find a teacher will teach a learner math from term 1 to 3rd term, but the child is scoring 0. You have even heard about the NEB results. There are a good number of learners who have scored 4th and ungraded, you know. So you find, where do those learners go? So it's high time we also pass that policy so that it clearly serves these learners. Okay. Then, okay.
As you wind up?
Yeah. Then the other thing is about the evidence that we have, okay, that exists about these learners. It should be well organized, and the ministry should be in the know from home, because learners with special needs, their journey starts from home up to school. The people they interact with, the teachers, okay. So all that limits their learning. So those are the opportunities that I see that we can do, work on, and still even the other ministry that I have to talk about is the ICT ministry, that should endeavor to see that the policy on special needs and on ICT for persons with disabilities is also passed, because you find that much as media house
for the one you just mentioned.
No. This one is for ICT.
Okay.
Because you find that even you as media houses, I'm not blaming you, but you just put someone to sign, but there are procedures, I mean guidelines on who should sign, because you find someone will come and sign, but with makeup, so a deaf child would, or a deaf person will only admire what the person is looking like, but not
okay, standard operating procedures for sign interpreters. Okay.
So all these things have to come in place so that we support this. But I'm thankful for the ministry and all the government bodies for looking out for these learners. Really, voices came out. The first steps were really just for ordinary learners, but when they realized, that's when they came on board. And even media houses.
Yeah.
How I wish UCC can also put just a specific TV station to run education programs, because we have seen it as an essential need to our learners.
All right, thank you very much, Martin. Yeah. I am totally in love with some of the aspects that you've put across, SOPs especially. We have so many SOPs as media houses, but we need to work, of course, with other categories as well to ensure that we are doing the very best. Elliot, I'll give you the last shot. What do you think are some of the opportunities that we can be able to pick out of this? We are thwarting this entire continuous learning, since we do not know when we'll be opening up, but also to better what we already have put in place.
Yeah, thank you very much. From the beginning, I talked about the issue of access. And having access in the community where we have schools that have been closed and the pupils are in the communities.
Yes.
We need to have a model of working with the community. Rosette talked about the issue of local councillors. But I don't know how many of our local councillors really, who maybe have an A6 level, who may really understand what the pupils want, the learners want from different categories. And we have been talking about inclusivity if we really want to see a change in Uganda's education. Are we having a community where people really come together to understand that a child is a community child, not an individual person's child, or a child is a government child? And if we can have that model of like, there is this case, doctor said we didn't know that this COVID was coming.
Yeah.
But now we have known that anything can happen.
Yeah.
How do we manage? I understand in Uganda we said there are spaces for Wi-Fi. I don't know whether that's Wi-Fi. I've never accessed free Wi-Fi on Kampala Road.
Maybe because you're able to buy your Wi-Fi.
No, I don't think so. So maybe can we have those spaces where maybe we have these children, they can manage to access this. We have been talking about opportunities of government working with other partners. We have UNICEF. We have these. We have embassies that have been working with us. We have local donors and international donors that have been working with us. In this space of lockdown, can really the line Ministry of Education reach to them and say, we have these small phones, the ones we call butochi, but who is there to direct a mother to know that you can use this phone to find a dictionary for a word, if maybe things are not working with you and the children. We have organizations that work on special needs education.
Yes.
And of which those organizations are within the community. You can have an opportunity of the ministry. Yes, Rosette said that they have those structures, but we can have these officers, the employers of these organizations that work on special needs, to help in the parents, not one to one. We have other opportunities where we have church leaders that have been not now doing the work that I've been doing before. We have that opportunity where the ministry can really reach out to the head of the church.
They're already fighting their own battles as well.
Yes, I don't want to talk about that. We are talking about these opportunities. Yes. But most especially as I end, Doctor, I'm not saying that Ministry of Education has not done its work, but where have we branded the sustainability we are talking about?
Okay.
If we have 50% of Uganda achieving sustainable development goals, where is education in this space? Because it seems that we are looking at all these different things, and I know Sophie will be coming out to talk about the budget that we have for education. But as ministry, where are we seeing sustainability for all that we are planning? The challenges are there. We are going to see the moves. We are not talking about the girls from the university and the students from the university who are supposed to go for their inductions, the teachers who are supposed to go for their practices. So it's like, so for me, as I end, Mildred and the viewers, I want to see Uganda copying other countries, not running at the same steps, but looking at the issue of inclusivity, that if we are talking about access, we are talking about access for all. If we are talking about affordability, that you are talking about of the tab, let Dr. not say that she's giving it as an example. Then what about other children? Then we are going to see the inequalities.
Okay.
If we are talking about the issue of applicability, what applies in a certain community is not going to apply to a certain community. And then we go to the issue of responsiveness as we do our strategies. I want to end there, and I really want to thank you, Mildred, for giving us the time, ISA and DGF.
Okay, thank you very much. But maybe just one more question as we go, Dr. Pamela. Many are asking online, is this planning that a Ministry of Education has, does it include university students? Because they think we are focusing more of lower level primary and secondary education. Are universities left aside? Because we also have special needs university students.
Thank you very much. The plan of the ministry includes all levels.
Okay.
We have different departments. Each department, like we have the Department of Higher Education, working together with National Council for Higher Education. They are not leaving out anybody.
Okay. Well, that's clarity. That is a very good. A number of issues that have come through, coming in from all the panelists right here: partnerships, applicability of what we want to be using, working with partners, of course, across various platforms to ensure that we include each and everyone. The need to train parents to actually go ahead and work around with special needs children. Martin did suggest the use of videos, for example, in our teaching. That will be very great to helping students understand better. Then also looking at an inclusive education policy that should be passed. That is a clarion call that has come through, utilizing available evidence, especially of special needs children in the communities that are around us. I think with that and a lot more, we will continue with this discussion, but what has come out clearly is the Ministry of Education has a plan, but the issue seems to be funds. That's where Martin said we need to work within our means. I want to end this particular session because we are having a third session coming through that continues to expand more on this. I want to remind you that disability is not inability. We'll be back.
Political Command Center.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for keeping it right here on NBS television as we continue with the discussion on the education sector during this COVID-19 times, as we are yet to get to know when exactly schools will be reopening. This conversation is brought to you by the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, ISA, together with the Democratic Governance Facility, DGF, and the Regional Education Learning Initiative, RELI. You can be able to find us on all our social media platforms at NBS TV on Twitter, NBS Television on Facebook, and Next Media Services on YouTube. Using the hashtag COVID-19 UG EDIOC, you will also be able to follow through and ask some of the questions. I've seen some of those. Some have already been answered, and those that are not yet answered, we will definitely ensure that we get to have them answered right here. This will be our third and our very last panel for this discussion as we continue to delve deeper into the education of Uganda. And without wasting any more time, I will introduce to you my panelists for today and for this last session. I do have Mr. Chaka Alfred, who is the Assistant Commissioner, Secondary Education in the Ministry of Education and Sports on my extreme right. A pleasure having you this afternoon.
Good evening, viewers.
Good evening to you. And I do also have Ms. Sophie Nampeo-Njuba, who is from the budget, who is a budget policy specialist with the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, CSBAG. Thank you for coming through, Sophie.
Thank you for having me, and good evening, viewers.
Good evening to you. It's a pleasure. On Skype, we will be having two panelists coming through. Ms. Salima Namsovia, who is coming in to us live from Tinda on Skype. We will also be having Dr. Mary Goretti Nakabgo, the Executive Director of Uwezo Uganda, who will also be coming to us live via Skype. But I want to start on hand with Mr. Chaka Alfred, right here in studio with me. He's the Assistant Commissioner, Secondary Education, like I did already mention. Mr. Chaka, many would like to know that what are some of those reforms, if you would highlight some of them, that have been put in place in learning by the Ministry of Education to initiate and implement the education process and learning, continued learning through this period of COVID-19. We know we were caught unaware, and we know that there is a lot of planning that is still ongoing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Relating to what reforms that have come on board regarding as part of the response plan for the Ministry of Education and Sports, is that one of them is that as a ministry we realize that there is a need to maintain and continue a sustained intervention in respect to the continued learning. Because our learners, the moment we broke off from school, we realized that many of them were now getting attracted by other cores at home, and we are forgetting the core principle of being at school. So as a ministry, one structural reform is the promotion of home-based schooling. Home-based schooling is captured also in the education sector plan, which is soon ending, as an alternative schooling program. At the same time, we also realized that on top of the home-based schooling, there is a need to promote education anytime, education anywhere. Because when the pandemic came up and these children were sent home, we realized that we as a ministry, we are not very much prepared to attend to this kind of emergency. Therefore, there was a need to ensure and bring on board all stakeholders to support all those initiatives that will promote learning anywhere and learning anytime. The third area, which we as a ministry, we are looking at one of a critical intervention in adjusting our structure, is the issue of the contingency capacity of the ministry. The ability of the ministry, enhancing the ability of the ministry to respond to emergencies and contingencies. COVID-19 came and nobody was prepared for it. Equally, as a ministry, have realized that that has been a very serious gap in responding to such kind of emergencies. And finally is the issue of rethinking education. In the past, and for all educationists, we tend to be very conservative in our method of thinking, that education can only take place within 4 walls of a classroom with a blackboard and a teacher in front. As a ministry, we are now looking at providing education in a wall-less classroom.
Okay.
So that now learners can be kept very busy at the same time, but not leaving behind the issue of not only integrating ICT, but using ICT as a critical mode of learning.
All right. Mr. Chaka, as you continue with your submission and what Ministry of Education is planning, wall-less education, thank you, very great to be paying attention to. But are you seeking to implement this in view of the challenges that could come through? Like previously, we were talking about the aspect of home chores, the timing itself. It's in the morning, most probably in the rural setting. That's the time that many of the students are expected to help out their parents with the digging and everything else. Are you planning to implement this, but looking at some of those challenges?
Yeah, thank you very much. We are aware of the social setup of our society in Uganda. We are aware that the moment a parent sees a child, what
free labor
he sees is the opportunity cost now of going to school comes in.
Okay.
Therefore, what we are doing now is to make sure that we do and we continue with the sensitization and bring on board all stakeholders that can help address this very big challenge within our communities, within our homes, and within our societies in general.
Okay. Well, I'll be coming back to you. Let me get to Dr. Mary Goretti Nakabgo, the Executive Director of Uwezo, who is joining us live from Mawanda Road on Skype. Wondering whether Dr. Mary Goretti is actually online. I'd like to know from you, how do you assess, or how has learning particularly been implemented? If we look at the pre-COVID times and COVID times during now that we did come through on such an unprecedented time, how would you rate learning, and how can it be improved anyway?
So thank you very much, and good evening, viewers. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel and to this dialogue. So yes, I'm happy to talk about the 3 aspects. How was learning implemented before COVID-19? How it is implemented now? And what should be done better post-COVID? So the evidence that we have at the moment, and I will draw mostly from the primary education sector, because that's where we have done most research in my organization, but I think that people at other levels of education will actually be able to identify with this evidence. So the evidence that there is that teaching and learning was way ahead of the learners. And in the process, it left so many children behind. What do I mean with this? So for example, in October 2018, we undertook an assessment of the competencies of literacy and numeracy of children across Uganda. It was actually nationally representative. And when you look at children between primary 3 and primary 7, and giving them a story of primary 2 level, children who have gone through 3 years of primary education, I'm talking about those in primary 3, only 10% could read and understand a primary 2 level, meaning that 90% of children sitting in a primary 3 classroom had been left behind. And this resonates pretty well with what the NCD's director talked about in the first panel, whereby even with the learning continuity materials that have been given, the printed materials, primary 3 kids are actually struggling to read them, yet these are revision materials for what they had already covered in term 1. So that we're not only talking about the lower classes, but even when you look at primary 5, for example, about 60% of the children in primary 5 could not read and understand a primary 2 level story. Meaning that you have in class 5, 60% of children who are being taught science and history and social studies and mathematics of primary 5, but they're not yet at the level of primary 2. So the curriculum was, and teaching and learning was way ahead of the children. The evidence also indicated that actually in some ways the learning was actually already declining before COVID-19. And for example, if you're looking at literacy of children between P3 and P7, those who could read and understand a primary 2-level story, our learning competencies or outcomes had declined from 39% in 2015 to 33% in 2018. So we already had that history of, yes, we had many children, actually many million children in school, but they were not really learning at the right level. Many had been left behind. So what is happening now at the moment? Surely we cannot expect something different from what was happening before. So the evidence that there is shows that a number of children were not actually learning at the right level. They were not learning normally, even before COVID-19 knocked the door. So it means those who were actually learning normally, and this is really good news, I think, positive, those who were learning normally would definitely benefit a lot from the learning continuity arrangement that has been put in place by the government, by Ministry of Education. And we should, I applaud the Ministry of Education on this for putting that arrangement in place. Because if we had these millions of kids seated at home without any form of learning at all, even these ones who are learning normally, chances are very high that they would lag behind. We don't have evidence at the moment. But when children have already acquired the foundations of learning, especially the reading, it's quite easy for them to actually learn even in different contexts. Those who are lagging behind, chances are very high that they'll actually lag behind because, I mean, if I'm in P5 and I didn't know how to read, even if you give me printed materials, it would be very difficult for me to read them and understand. It may also be quite difficult for me to follow a lesson on radio or TV. But as the commissioner from the Ministry of Education has actually said, we are not only depending on the children teaching themselves. Hopefully the adults, the more able adults or people in the household are able to read. So what does this mean when schools reopen? What should we do differently? First of all, even before the schools reopen, the learning continuity that is in place, the teaching on radio, the teaching on TV, the printed materials, they should continue in a better form. I mean, there has been evidence really informally that there were challenges. Maybe the lessons on TV are taught very fast. Some kids are already in the garden when the lessons are being taught. The printed materials didn't reach many households. So I hope these, and I think the Ministry of Education officials who were on the panel already mentioned that they've learned from those mistakes and things are going to be done better. So I hope that that continuity is going to be there. And when schools reopen, and again, thankfully, the Minister of Education has already confessed and said that actually they've already ruled out the issue of a dead year, because a dead year is not called for. There's no need for a dead year. But when schools reopen, rather than just progressing children to the next level, students to the next level, you can't assume that everyone has been learning at the same level. Given the evidence that we gave, that many were already lagging behind, we need to have some catch-up programs. First of all, we need to understand where each child or student is when they come back. And then we try to put in place catch-up programs to help those who may have actually fallen behind. The truth is that those who are not learning at the right level, or normally, will fall far behind. And we need to put in place an arrangement where they are helped to catch up. But also the ones who are learning normally, they need to refresh. This happened, I mean, I can share from a personal story. In 1985, when the liberation wall reached the Katonga area, where that's my home area happens to be there, we were out of school for almost 5 months, almost 5 months, and I was in P7. We didn't have a dead year. When the war ended, around February, we were called back and we were taught for a few weeks, and we caught up and we did our PLE exam. But that depended very much on the fact that we had acquired and automated the foundations of learning. Reading was not a problem for me, so it was easy to catch up. So we need to help these kids when they come back to school to catch up on those competences, and we can promote them to other classes. There's no need of having a dead year or making millions of kids repeat classes. But again, there should be an arrangement where we actually formalize the issue of remedial learning, because chances are very high, and it's true, that even when we promote children to other classes, many might not be able to catch up easily on higher learning. It means that we may want to actually have some remedial arrangements where we help them to catch up on a few foundational learning or skills and competences for them to be able to catch up with learning in a new class. I guess I should stop at that.
Mary Goretti, I'll definitely be coming back to you. Did highlight quite a number of key issues that we would want to dig deeper into. But let me first of all cross over to Ms. Salima Namsobia, who is the Executive Director of our hosts this afternoon, which is the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. We would like to know from you, Ms. Salima, what are some of the policy recommendations that you would be able to share that government can be able to adopt to implement in respect of the right to education and its realization during this COVID time, but also post-COVID?
Thank you very much. Good evening. I've been listening to the discussions that have been going on. And from the onset, I would want to recommend that as Ugandans and as policymakers, we look at remote learning only as a temporary measure that cannot replace class learning indefinitely. The use of online technology, radio and TV's printed materials must only be looked at as temporary and should only be deployed side by side with working on longer-term solutions. So from the start, I think it should be clear that what we're doing here is to replace classroom learning, because we've seen the failures of the remote learning, and we must work very hard to get back to the normal classroom learning with interaction with teachers as we've always had it. Now, first of all, we need to acknowledge that we are being hit hard in the education sector because our system was already having significant weaknesses in our education system. We had stagnating financing to the education sector, despite the growing population and the inflation that we have. And we found ourselves in a situation where we have very large class sizes, we have few teachers, or no school infrastructure in some cases, and there is a growing unregulated. We must see the challenge that the pandemic has presented us and rechannel be able to solve the pandemic. So for me, from a policy perspective, the pandemic one in education infrastructure, especially in underserved areas. We also have to work to reduce education inequalities by channeling resources to ensure affirmative action for vulnerable groups. For example, children with disabilities and those in rural and hard-to-reach areas. And I may give a very concrete policy recommendation. Currently, the idea of distributing capitation grants based on the numbers that a particular school has is failing us, and it is increasing the inequalities that we have in the country. We must be able to relook at the way we allocate resources and apply affirmative action to ensure that those places that are underserved are helped before other places that find themselves, for example, in urban areas where people are able to, for example, make contributions to the education of their children. Then I would like to also point out a few areas where the country we really need to focus in order to get quality education for the children going forward. And like I mentioned, in the short term, we need to discuss continued learning. That is not that is an issue that has been discussed extensively, and I would not want to be in the medium term. I'm not talking about start working on now beside the continuing learning system. First of all, you need to look at the class sizes that we've been having. This has been both in public and private schools increasingly, but the situation is more dire in the public schools that we have. We have situations where now there are over 200 children sitting in a class, and with COVID-19, of course, social distancing is possible under any circumstances. And I'll give you examples of schools that visited as ISA. If you give the example, for example, Immediate Primary School in Yombe District, or another school called Lokutua Primary School, again in Yombe District, these schools have 250 pupils per class in lower primary. So there is no way, even looking at the standard operating procedure of health has issued, that we can be able to reopen these schools unless we have addressed the class size issue. Secondly, there is the question of teachers. People were bringing ideas, for example, regarding the fact that we should be able to get teachers to move maybe and help out children within their communities. But the mere fact that we have very few teachers and who are not well facilitated is a big problem for us as a country. And this is the time that we need to reflect and address it immediately before we move forward. Then there's the issue of school infrastructure. This is dire in many places, especially upcountry, rural, hard-to-reach areas. There are places that do not even have the basic infrastructure. We still have children who are either studying under trees or who are studying in unsafe buildings, whereby you see that the building is going to fall on the children at any point. And I will give you an example. For example, a school called Namakeva Primary School in Buvuma District. Buvuma is an island district. And this school has over 500 learners, but it does not have proper infrastructure. There is just a single mud structure. There are no toilets for both the students and the teachers. And, you know, there are places to give as examples, but the interest of time, we would need to move on. And then there's the issue of inclusion of vulnerable groups. For example, children with disabilities, minorities, refugees. We do now have an inclusive policy that is not being implemented. It was talked about earlier, but it is a very good policy that remains on paper. And it needs financing, it needs resources if we are going to really talk about quality education, even beyond COVID-19, because as we know, we must continue with education as we know it. And then also this pandemic has the risk of the rising commercialization of education. And this is being seen both in the public and the private sector. Education is increasingly becoming unaffordable, and it is time for policymakers to go back and reinvest in the sector give enough resources to be able to ensure that all children are able to go to school regardless of their social background, regardless of who they are, regardless of capacity to pay. And this should be checked. And among other things, the government needs to fast track policy of regulation of private actors in the country to ensure both the parents and the children. We'll also talk about the issue of participation of stakeholders. And when I talk about participation, we must also include the children in designing education solutions for this country. We are talking about COVID-19 and what should we be doing, should schools be opening, but many stakeholders have ideas to put on the table. The ministry has been largely operating behind the scenes and only coming out once in a while to say, oh, we are planning for continued, we are planning on radios, and yet many stakeholders are development partners have ideas that could be brought to the table to come up with a workable solution to ensure that we get our children back into school in a manner that is compliant with the COVID-19 advisory, but also ensure that there is continued learning. And lastly, I would want to talk about the issue of quality data for planning purposes. And also we need to have a policy whereby schools need to understand their catchments. Schools need to understand where the children they are serving are coming from, such that in situations like this, these children can be traced. When materials came up, the Ministry of Education was first of all confused. They didn't know how to find the children outside of the school setting. So we need to have a system that should be able to follow up on the children and be able to ensure that they are engaged in continued learning. And here we are going to have a serious problem. Again, you heard from the Director of Basic Education, where he was saying that they are not even sure whether the children they sent home are going to come back to school. So that means that many of them are going to drop out. You guys at NBS have also run various stories where you've seen many girl children getting pregnant, and it's possible that these girls will be lost on the radar. Some of them will get married. And we need to get a system, an interagency system that gets children traced and brought back into the education system. Even if a girl got pregnant, we should be able to bring them back into the education system. But just to emphasize that what we had pre-COVID and what we are doing with the continuing learning right now within the COVID context is widening the inequalities that exist between the rich and the poor children, between children in urban areas and those in rural hard-to-reach areas. And it is very urgent that this situation is immediately addressed to ensure that we are not leaving any child behind. Thank you, Mildred.
Thank you very much, Ms. Salima Nansovia. We'll definitely be getting back to you when time does allow. Ms. Salima was talking about some of the policy recommendations that need to be put in place to ensure realization of the right to education. Now, I want to come to Ms. Sophie Nampeo right here to talk about some of the financing reforms that could be adopted by government. Sophie, while speaking throughout from the other panels, one thing that has come through is that there is a lot that the Ministry of Education and Sports has planned, but the issue seems to be funding. For example, when we talked about the aspect of special needs children, they said, for example, Braille, the original format has been already dealt with, but having to get the photocopies or having to duplicate it for the learners who use Braille is a problem because there are no funds. So what are some of those funding, reforms that could be taken on to deliver quality education, but also that's inclusive and equitable?
Thank you very much, Mildred, and good evening, viewers, once again. Before I go into the funding, I would like to commend government, first of all, for what it has done for the education sector. Because if you are to compare funding to all other sectors, education seems to be getting quite a big chunk of financing from government to this sector. However, we realize that most of this funding is to paying wages and salaries. We have quite a number of teachers that most of this money will go to paying teachers from around the country. And that has become a challenge in terms of the development expenditure that is required by the education sector. You've just mentioned the requirements for special needs, the equipment that they need to work with. Government has, over the years, focused a lot on formal education, providing UPE, USE, go to university, finish. And after that, we've got a number of graduates that have nowhere to go, that are not skilled at all. And that is a gap also that government has left out, the skilling. Vocational education is very good. It's, however, very expensive, and government needs to take a hand into it. We've had challenges of early childhood development. Most of it is privately funded.
Yes.
Government has taken a step back and left that to the private sector. So what reforms need to be taken up in terms of financing that government can take up to improve the education sector for sustainability moving forward? One, I would emphasize investing more in skills development, investing in vocational institutions. We've had some technical institutes turn into universities. Why? We need these vocational institutes to continue doing their work. We need to have a system, if it could be enforcing national service for everyone, every learner during vacation, maybe have 2-3 months, learn something, learn a skill. Government has just invested in a new curriculum, and unfortunately it had just started and we had the lockdown. COVID came into play. But this, first of all, was starting with secondary education. Why secondary education? Why don't we start all the way from primary? Because it's looking at a learner, seeing their abilities, picking out the strengths, and trying to move with them as they learn.
Yes.
Why not start when they're young? The early childhood development that I've said that government has taken a step back. A child begins as far as nursery school, preschool, to learn. Why isn't government having a hand in it? So the reforms, one is government should effectively regulate the early childhood development education. Come in and not leave it to the private sector to determine what one learns in nursery. Yes, they are learning ABC, they're learning how to sing, but even this should be regulated in a way. They need to learn at a particular standard so that when you get to primary one, we are all at the same level. There are some who do not go for early childhood development. Why? If it's regulated, it should be a standard for everyone. Two, government needs to invest more in in vocational institutions, technical institutions. Because of the expenses, the private sector will not be enticed into going into this. But this is a very important area where we need skills. There is a time in the area of oil exploration where they needed welders. Why isn't Uganda able to provide welders? If we have the skills, if we've trained our learners to have these skills, we should be able to provide these, because a lot of construction is going on, a lot of development is happening, and we need plumbers, we need welders, we need builders. Why would someone who knows how to put a brick and cement together say that he can't bring up a big building if they don't have the skills? That's why we're having some buildings come down, because the skills are not well developed. If government invests in these, we'll go a long way. You'll have learners who are not waiting to be employed, but they're able to create jobs because they have the skills to do that and bring others on board.
Okay.
So I would emphasize a reform in skills development being something that government takes up wholeheartedly, regulates it, invest more. Let's not have more universities come up than the vocational institutions.
But well, Sophie, I agree with you on that. But here is a question of perception in society, that I being able to take my child to a vocational institute means they've failed in class.
No.
Or they cannot be able. I'm looking at the perception coming in from the parents, or actually even the parents thinking is my child goes through primary to secondary and university. That way I'm a successful parent who has educated their child.
But you can't be successful even in a vocational institute.
I'm looking at the perception with the parents now.
Yes, I see you're looking at a perception, and that goes back to what we have, what our brains have been put to believe or follow. If we have the formula that go primary, go secondary, go to university.
Who is going to press the Control-Alt-Delete?
Government still has to do that.
Okay.
Government still has to do that. And that's why I mentioned a bit of, if it has to be a national service, that, I mean, S4VAC, as a rule, during my vacation, let me take 2 months off. If it's set as a standard, you have to take 2 months off, go maybe learn how to, for girls, learn how to cook. Let it be standard. Why should you get to university and you can't even fry an egg? So if it's put as a regulation, if it's regulated by government, it slowly, our mindsets will change. Okay. You're seeing more people, the time you finish, okay, let me say you've gone to university and finished. You've finished university, you're able to use a computer, you're able to do chef work, you're able to cook, you're able to do plumbing, you at least have an idea. In case your tap breaks down, you don't shut down because you can't find a plumber to come and fix your tap. You have somewhere to start. So if we have such things, we will be able to move a step forward. Okay. One last issue that I wanted to emphasize is the need to set service delivery standards. Government has invested a lot in infrastructure, has invested a lot in schools, how they move, but why should a school in Wakiso be different from a school in Katakwi if they are both government-aided schools? Why should I find a school in Katakwi that has no blackboard, they're studying under a tree, yet we are investing a lot in infrastructure for the schools, and schools in Wakiso are well established, they have laboratories for the secondary schools that are required, and people up country are struggling. If we have set standards for infrastructure, for the teachers, how they're able to teach, we are now going on to online education. If we know what the basic standards are, then you're able to reduce on the crowding of some schools and the having empty classrooms, if I may say. There are no empty classrooms, but you might have less students or less learners in some schools than others. Okay. If we have set standards that are uniform, I will not have to look into taking a child to Gayaza when a school in Gulu has been established with the same standards, okay, and they are able to live up to the learning requirements that are set.
Okay. Mr. Chaka, you talked about the continued learning, but one aspect, now that the ministry is saying there is no dead year, how are we going to deal, even through this period, how do we get to deal with practical subjects? Many have asked this actually even online. Practical subjects like sciences that will not be taught on TV. You need hands-on experience for the students.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mildred. It is true, it is very challenging to teach practical subjects using online programs, but it is also possible that, unfortunately, as a country, we have not gone to that level of high-tech. It is also possible to use simulations and other interventions that can help learners really try out these practicals online. However, all is not yet lost. We still have a lot of hope, and this is what we Ugandans must be having all the time. That the moment these learners come back, we are now putting too much emphasis on those areas that don't require hands-on. But when the learners come back, we shall have accelerated learning programs, we shall have catch-up programs, and these learners will be taken through the hands-on experiences so that they are able to really do the practicals as we had planned. Okay. But otherwise, time has come for us now to rethink the way we teach our learners. These practicals can be taught in a soft way, using simulations, using models, and using projections. Okay. And it can be done.
And also, what are the plans for higher education? Because, you know, this conversation is seemingly about when we say learners, many tend to, you know, acclimatize themselves with secondary education, primary education, and the lower levels. What do we have planned for higher education? Because I did see that the government requested and said, you know, universities should come up with e-learning, but are they ready out of the studies that you have even done as Ministry of Education?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, the position of Minister of Education and Sport is that the universities are not, first of all, on the same footing in respect to ICT. But two, we feel as a ministry, the universities should use ICT to teach their learners. Now, you realize that because they are different levels of footing, we are encouraging homegrown initiatives by the universities themselves. You will find Makerere University, you will find KIU, you will find Christian University, Mukono. These universities are different levels. But they are homegrown initiatives, self-driven initiatives by each university to reach out to the learners online. However, we feel that no learner should be disadvantaged under these homegrown initiatives. So we are promoting what we call homegrown initiatives.
Okay. I'll come to Dr. Mary Goretti as we get to wind up with our panel, joining us via Skype. As you give us your closing remarks, Dr. Mary Goretti, you highlighted the aspect that even during pre-COVID, learning was already declining, looking at over 39% to 33% in about 2018. Where exactly is the problem with our learning, and that needs to be addressed as we get out of COVID and embrace education again?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mildred. I lost some of what you asked because there was a little disconnection. But I guess the main challenge that there was in our teaching and learning, I mentioned it earlier, is that our teaching and learning tended to leave so many children behind. So, you know, there's always this drive of syllabus coverage, cover the curriculum. And there might be a temptation of that if ministry doesn't come in to regulate this. I'm glad the commissioner is talking about accelerated learning programs that are going to be put in place when schools reopen, because basically that is what we need. Instead of just covering the curriculum and finishing the syllabus, we need to ensure that the children are learning at their own pace. I gave you an example of, say, primary 5 children. 60% are seated in the primary school classroom. They are being given printed materials of primary 5, but they can't even read at primary 2 level. So what do you need to do in that case? We need to ensure that every child, every student, because you even have, you talked about university students, you even have some university students who cannot read and understand probably text, who can write meaningfully. So you need to ensure that irrespective of class or sector, be it primary, secondary, or higher education level, we must ensure that when the schools reopen, because it's quite difficult to do this through homeschooling, but when schools reopen, we ensure that we establish where each student or learner is and try to start at the level where they are. If they cannot read when they're in senior 3, why would you give them chemistry of senior 3? Try to ensure that at least they catch up on the best foundations of reading so that they are able to actually be able to read even harder or higher level materials. So we need to ensure that, yes, let children progress, but there should be those catch-up programs at the beginning. But even when students have been promoted, there should be moments where there is that remedial to ensure that they catch up on those foundations which are critical for learning at any level.
Very much, Dr. Mary Goretti, for your submissions. And I would like now to get to Ms. Salima Namsovia. I'll give you just a minute, Ms. Salima. What do you think are the key take-homes and way forward for our education system right now while we're still in the COVID-19, before the education institutions open, but even after? Okay.
Thank you very much, Mildred. Like I said earlier, the COVID-19 situation has only helped bring to the fore weaknesses that we already had in the education sector, and many of these weaknesses stem from under-resourcing of education. And as a country, we need to go back to the drawing board, acknowledge that education is an expensive venture, and be able to set aside enough resources to be able to get the children back to school. I talked about the issue of class sizes, lack of infrastructure. There are many children who are still in places where there are no classrooms at all. But if the classrooms are there, you have over 250 pupils in the classroom. The teacher-to-pupil ratio is very high. So in these situations, the cure is going to be in resources. We need to invest in resources, and this is something that we must emphasize. And with the growing issue of privatization, we also need to check the growing privatization to ensure that we do not commodify education and make it unaffordable to the millions of Ugandans. Thank you, Mildred.
Thank you very much, Ms. Salima, for your submissions. And I want to say bye-bye to you online and to Dr. Mary Goretti Nakabgo. But I know that this discussion doesn't end here. It does continue online. Now I want to get back to my panelists in studio. I'd like to start off with you, Sophie. There's been a huge exposure, of course. This caught us unaware, and there is a lot more that needs to be done. But what do you think moving forward we need to adopt and do particularly?
I'll emphasize three things.
Yes.
One is skilling alongside the formal being primary, secondary, university. Let's have a way we bring in the vocational or technical way of learning.
And as parents change our mindset?
Yes.
Okay.
The other is regulation. Ms. Salima has just mentioned, let's not have private entities look at it as a commercial, as a business, basically, education. Let's not commercialize it. That means we need to regulate early childhood development, regulate if it's school fees that they're collecting. Let us see how we regulate these transactions. I'll call them transactions for lack of a better word, within the education sector, so that we have a uniform way of providing learning and have no one left behind because they can't afford or they are not able to meet whatever standards have been set. The other is standardization. Standardization of, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the skills that we're providing. What is the quality of education that we're giving? Why is one school better than the other? We find out why, and then find a way of bringing the one that is down up to the level of the one that is doing well. That means we have standards of how you teach. You're not going, if you're teaching mathematics, how are you going to teach mathematics to a child with no blackboard, for example? Because I would imagine if I'm going to multiply and divide, and if you're using board mass, how will I understand it if I can't really see it or even write it down? If it's rubbed away, how do I remember? So if we have standards that we use in these schools, if for learners, we are able to track our progress and also have quality education coming through.
All right, thank you very much, Sophie. To you, Mr. Chaka, the way forward. Ministry of Education is definitely on the spotlight, and we will not stop asking when we will be open. We will wait for the professionals, of course, to advise. But what's the way forward for our education sector, not only during this period, but even after COVID-19? So that maybe when we're hit by another pandemic, God forbid, or any other calamity, we are able to cope up. Lessons learned.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mildred. The most important thing we need to focus on is a paradigm shift in the minds of everyone in Uganda. A paradigm shift aimed at promoting new innovations, new initiatives, but also looking at the issue of promoting self-learning. These students need to be empowered to learn on their own with limited support from teachers, but also a paradigm shift in the area of ICT, and also finally the issue of resilience and empowering our learners with resilience, with life skills, and making them able to cope up with whatever challenges that come on board, but without forgetting the role of the parent and the community in educating this child.
All right, thank you very much. That's been Mr. Chaka Alfred, an Assistant Commissioner of Secondary Education from the Ministry of Education and Sports. Also with me in studio, I've been with Ms. Sophie Nampewo-Njuba, from the budget, who is a budget policy specialist from the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, CSPAC. I had Dr. Mary Goretti Nakabgo, who joined us via Skype. That's the Executive Director of WEZO, and also had Ms. Salima Namsovia, our hosts for tonight, the Executive Director of the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. One clear thing that has come through is that there's been a lot of exposure on some of the weaknesses that we need to work on with COVID-19 now in place, but also from this particular panel, the paradigm shift, like Mr. Chaka did say, paradigm shift in terms of how to use ICT, in terms of promoting life skills, in terms of personal learning, not only having to depend on the teachers. And like Sophie did say, the aspect of skilling, we need to snap out of the whole idea of thinking it's formal education that makes someone successful. Skills and technical education can as well produce a very successful citizen. But also talking about regulation, especially for early childhood education, I think early childhood development and education is one aspect that the Ministry of Education needs to come through, away from just regulating and putting in place a curriculum or syllabus, but also ensuring that they actively do get to engage, because that's the foundation of education, and also standardization. I can't say more than that. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. We're not stopping this discussion here. Let it continue online using the hashtag COVID-19UGEduc. That will be great for us to continue engaging. The stakeholders who have also been discussing right here in studio will continue to answer some of the questions that will be coming through. But from the Political Command Center, NBS Television, we want to say thank you so much for being a wonderful audience. I've been your host, Mildred Tohaise. Have a good evening. God bless you. Up next is NBS After 5.